Greetings, everyone. Today, I am happy to say that we have Elysabeth Williamson with us. And Elysabeth started principle-based partner yoga. And the way I think of it, or I understand it, is that, yoga is not just for our physical, although it is great, right, for balance and strength, but really yoga for our whole being. And Elizabeth is really helping us with our whole being. I think being is such an important word here. And she's recently led a talk called Exploring the Great Mystery and Befriending Death. So you see why she's such a great person to have with us on the Death Dhamma podcast. And she likes to speak about the transformative power of contemplating death and reclaiming the sacred nature of death and the time of transition, right? Because it is a transition that we go through. And you may find her at elysabethwilliamson.com. But what I want you to know is that her name is Elysabeth, and then Williamson, Williamson. So, Elizabeth, thank you for patiently waiting while I said all that, and welcome. And would you like to add to any of that? Please do.
Thank you very much for that, Margaret. And thank you for spelling my name correctly. Um, yeah, I think that partner yoga is something that is quite different from more traditional practice and something that I was just really inspired to develop because I think relationships are the place where we receive the most joy and fulfillment and also the greatest heartbreak and challenge.
I agree. Oh my gosh. And then within that, you've become inspired to also handle the topic of death. So what brought you that?
Well, it was interesting when I wrote my book almost 20 years ago now. I just developed this practice
Mhm.
as something we could do together as a form of partner yoga where one person would sit as the guardian and the other person would lay in Shavasana. And
Mhm.
through some guided relaxation techniques, they would explore what it would feel like when that moment came and added some questions around it. And this practice I've integrated into my partner yoga work, but it's really it's come alive in these recent years. And
Mhm.
I think it's just very relevant to the times. And I think the other reason why I'm more inspired to work with it is when people hear the word partner yoga,
Mhm.
there's a lot of resistance and thoughts like, oh, well, I don't have a partner, and that's not the way I teach it, significant
Oh,
other.
okay.
Or they say, I don't do yoga. But with death, we all die and we all lose our loved ones. So it's a much more universal um, application that people can feel.
That makes sense. Eventually, we're all going to be in Shavasana,
Yes,
right?
exactly.
We're all going to be in the corpse pose. Now, would you please remind me, your book, is it still available?
Yes, it
And tell me
is.
what it is called. Would you remind me of the title of your
Well,
book?
the pleasures and principles of partner yoga.
Okay.
And people can order the hard copy
Mhm.
and a PDF version both through my site.
Great, great. I appreciate that. Now, there's so many paths you can take, in exploring this topic of death. And so maybe tell us even more about like your focus.
Yeah, I think my focus has always been on both relationship and embodiment.
Mhm.
Not about transcendence, but really illuminating the body, bringing it fully in. And even in the practice of Shavasana, I was always kind of struck by it was never mentioned that this practice really is a practice of the ultimate letting go. And so we get to feel in our body, imagining and feeling directly what it might feel like to let go of these layers of holding and identification that I am this body that's always changing.
I get that. As you're speaking, I'm kind of thinking back to, my own yoga practice. And when I do with a group at the end, so often we do end with Shavasana, but there isn't a lot of emphasis given to what is that really? Might be the reference of this is corpse pose, but it's almost more like relaxation at the end of the yoga session and not really going into the depth that you're explaining to us. So that's definitely interesting. Now, when
I,
you're working with groups, oh, go
Margaret,
ahead.
I would just like to say one more point there with the relaxation. I mean,
Mhm.
that's really what we're doing when we're exploring death. We're just unwinding and
Oh,
we're actually naming what we're unwinding, not just any physical holding, but our thoughts and our emotions. And then we can go even deeper into this is who I am. And
mhm.
for me, the greatest gift of that unwinding is the possibility of glimpsing that we are more than this life and this body. And
Right.
that's what happens. And we can talk about that forever. But to have a direct embodied experience can really change someone's life.
Okay. Okay. And I would imagine that's why you really do this emphasis of having people sit with a partner while a partner is in corpse pose to kind of help get us to that
It
place.
helps with the safety, but even that role, that's a very important role too, because that could support us at some point in life to actually do the real thing with a
Hmm.
loved one, with an aging parent, with a friend, to be able to sit with as much clear mind, open heart as we can from holding the practice of being a guardian.
Hmm. Hmm. And so while you've been doing this and you're facilitating groups and people, what do you observe? And are there any commonalities?
Oh, yes. It's so it makes me laugh at sometimes, but other times I'm saddened by the reality that people have a lot of resistance to this kind of exploration. But the thing that I observe more than anything is just how quickly people go from a lot of fear, a lot of tightness to this feeling of bliss and joy just by being willing to talk in a safe circle. And just the intensity of the resistance to the topic just softens so quickly. And we just, there's a joy and there's a levity that
Mhm.
happens.
Now, what is it you think that helps somebody come from that place of resistance to that place of bliss?
Um, I think it's the safety, and I also think being in a space where we see how we all are the same. We all have these feelings, and when we're afraid, our egoic, separate self aspect thinks no one suffers like we do.
And we're so darn good at it.
Yes. And, we hold that very precious and close. And so then when we sit in a circle, and that's one of the things I believe happens that we see, oh, everyone feels this way. And just knowing that universality of
Hmm.
has a very profound release.
Oh, okay. That understanding. Oh, you're afraid of death too? Yeah.
And
Okay.
that you have this particular fear. And,
Mhm.
I mean, it is said to be the deepest fear.
Right, right. Other than, although it depends now. So sometimes in when I do some speaking in another world, which is a little more, business focused, and I have people do presentations, I do notice that public speaking, sometimes some people are more afraid of public speaking than death, but we are all still afraid of death. So there is that.
What's interesting is I would say that that's true even for myself. I
Okay.
love teaching. I
Hmm.
love having conversations like the one we're having, but
Hmm.
just to get up and speak where I feel separate is very scary.
It is true because you feel a little isolated. You're like at
Yeah.
the front of the pack by yourself. One of my students said it so eloquently. What did she say? She said, Margaret, don't you understand that I'd rather be in the box than giving the eulogy? I was like, wow, that was a long time ago, but you see, it stuck with me. And that wasn't even, we weren't even talking about death. It was, like I said, it was a business class, but we were talking about project presentations, but still, that was her comment. And so it's interesting that she,
Yeah,
combined those two
I
things
think
together.
that great fear is our fear of judgment, first of all,
Hmm.
and our sense of being separate.
Hmm.
We're not separate. And when we hold circles, that's one of the things that we see, that we're in this together. And
Oh,
and I
yes.
think that's part of the release of our fear of death. We know that we're all going through this together.
And is there more to this root fear of death? What do you think? Is there more to it than
I
what we're talking about?
definitely think so. I think that this really gets into a way deeper conversation, but for myself, I think what I've come to is it's a fear of total annihilation, of no longer existing. Because, my personal feeling is that consciousness, as we know, energy cannot be
Hmm.
created or destroyed. So my personal belief is that wherever we go, including into death, there we are. And
Hmm.
but I think an even deeper fear is that we won't exist, that we'll be completely annihilated, and there's no self at all.
And
And
that's that we don't. So do you think it's that we as humans don't want to think that this is it, we're here, we're gone, and then there's nothing, so it's like we were never here?
well, I wouldn't explain it like that exactly because
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
think that what you just said has value. Like one of the very first um, questions that I will ask us to contemplate is who believes that this is it? That that end of story. We die, end of story. And
Hmm.
I think there's a lot of people that do feel that.
Hmm.
When I ask the next question, which is, and how does that make you feel to believe that this is it?
Hmm.
And, oftentimes the answer to that question is it makes them want to live their lives fully and with meaning. And to me, that's the bottom line. Whatever your thought, feeling, story about what happens when you die, just the contemplation of death brings meaning and aliveness to our
Hmm.
life.
Okay.
And for myself personally, I have realized that I'm much more afraid of being fully alive than of dying. And
Oh,
yeah, and that's,
okay.
I think, true for a lot of people once they start the exploration.
So it's not death we're afraid of, but it's the living on the way out.
Yeah, it's the just really being willing to be fully alive, feel all our
Mhm.
feelings, express ourselves, be who we really are.
And I know that you believe that, and as do I, that exploring death can help us be more fully alive. And maybe you can add a little bit more to that. So, like this practice of being aware of death, helping us being fully alive. what does that really mean to us?
Well, one of the things that I believe to be true is that in order to explore these deep realms, we need to feel safe.
Okay.
And I think that that sense of safety arises when there's some ground of self-love and self-honor and self-tenderness and compassion, these
Mhm.
qualities. And when we can cultivate them, or again, just simply ask the question, what is self-love? And
Mhm.
once we get some sense of how we honor ourselves and care for ourselves, then we can go into the deeper dive.
Okay. Okay.
And and once we go into that deeper dive, we start to get clearer about what it is we value.
So when you say that, what is self-love? What are some answers that you would think you would hear, or what are some answers that resonate for you? That question, what is self-love?
Yeah, thank you for asking that because
Yeah.
it's a challenging question and I'd
Mhm.
love to hear your response to it too.
Mhm.
I think that it's the connection and the devotion to this part of myself that's I could use the word divine or sacred, something that I know is larger than the human me that can feel scared and vulnerable. And
Mhm.
that part of me can hold the the very young, tender human part.
Yeah, yeah. All right. So you did say you want to hear me, so I think that that's fair. I think for me, especially one of the things I've really been working on this past year in my life with self-love has to do with balance, and also working towards equanimity towards myself and towards others in the world around us. And so when I kind of put that all together in self-love, it means to forgive who I've been in the past, and each day try to be the person, that I want to be. And, at the end of that day to move forward, because on that day, like today, I may not get to the end of the day and go like, wow, you did an amazing job. Um, and to, with balance, provide what I think is needed in my life to help me move forward on my spiritual path as a layperson, right? A person in the world living the layperson life. And what is it I can do to help myself towards release from suffering while still helping others around me? And that ties back to some of the balance and equanimity, because I do find that sometimes maybe some of the people who reach out towards me, I do want to help, but I have to be careful of the kind of help I give so that it doesn't take me to a difficult place in my spiritual life. That was a lot, but so thank you for listening to that. Obviously, I was thinking that through. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I understand. But again, you were thinking it through because it's an important question,
Yeah.
right? It's a
Mhm.
deep question and others listening to this conversation may be able to ask themselves that question. So that's a lot of what we do in the
Mhm.
workshops, just really ask these very relevant questions where we get to, you know, contemplate and inquire deeply and build this sense of self-love and relationship with ourselves
Mhm.
so that we can live our lives with greater depth and heart and meaning and
Mhm.
compassion for others.
Well, this is probably a good place to learn more about some of the practices you use in your retreats. And then also, I know you have a retreat coming up next month. So, everyone, when you're listening to this, this is April 2025. And Elizabeth has a retreat in May of 2025, just to put a timestamp on that. But perhaps share with us about that retreat, but also some of the practices, if you would.
So in the recent retreats, I've had a dear friend of mine who's been a midwife for 40 years, and she brings sound healing, or healing sound, however we want to say that. And she has a plethora of instruments. And that just really brings, I've noticed the unifying effect of sound.
Mhm.
So on the beginning night, we'll use that sound healing to do a group deep relaxation, a form of yoga nidra for those that are familiar with that. And everybody's gone through whatever they had to go through to get to the retreat itself. So I like to begin just with a little introduction, a little conversation on what's alive on the topic of death for them. And that can range, from a very, I have young people come afraid of death, and then I have elders and everything in between. So we just start slowly building that sense of connection in the circle and knowing that this is not going to hurt. We're here to relax and release and inquire. And then, we'll do forgiveness practices, and that can be a whole depth of self-seeing, seeing that ultimately a lot of forgiveness is towards ourselves.
Mhm.
We do again the self-love practices, and not so much practices, but really what is self-love? And I believe we're all conditioned to care out here for everyone else, and then, caring for ourselves up until
Mhm.
recently was considered selfish or
Right.
self-indulgent or
Yeah.
egoic or whatever. And now we know that if we are not caring for ourselves, then we are really of no use, and our relationships are just one of codependence. I'm doing this for you, and I expect you're going to do it for me.
Yes, that was a lesson I really had to learn off and on throughout the years of don't give with the expectation of something in return. And if you can't, then just don't give until you're ready to give. Like don't give with strings attached, right? And the other part is I still need this reminder frequently from one or two of my teachers, which is, you can't give what you don't have, which goes back to you know, keeping your well replenished. Yeah,
Exactly.
definitely.
So we get to explore those questions, and when the moment comes, and by the time the actual peak practice in the retreat is this sitting as guardian and practicing your own death.
Mhm.
Often by the time we get to that practice, um, the joy and the release that is felt in the space, it can often be a little challenging to go, okay, we're going to go in and deep now, because there's already been such a feeling of relief.
Mm-hmm.
We'll do some journaling. What's your myth on death? Or
Mm-hmm.
if you had to say it right now, what do you believe happens when we die? So it's very rich
Right.
self-inquiry that I
Right.
think is a precious opportunity.
That's great. Now, why is it important for us to have a myth around death?
Well, that's one of the things that I learned from Carl Jung's work.
Okay.
And the individuation of the self, which um, my understanding of that, his way of expressing the self is the deep center of our being. And he just felt like that was the most important thing that we can do in terms of having a deep relationship with our own being. And that, like our relationship with God or the Buddha,
Mm-hmm.
whatever nature, whatever form of higher intelligence we happen to be drawn to, um, that this really will cultivate that. This will
Mm-hmm.
really help us give depth and meaning to our lives.
Okay. Okay. So the myth helps us with how we live our lives, and what we think is going to happen at the end is also informing the choices we make during. And do you encounter sometimes people who don't have a myth or haven't really thought about it?
Yeah, I think that most people.
Okay, okay. I wasn't sure. I will say once I have a friend, and he was very close to his grandmother. And when she died, this was like his first, I'll say, big death in his life. And one of the things that troubled him was that he said, I don't know what I believe about what happens to her next or where she is. And that did turn out to be something very troubling for him. He said, I don't believe I was ever taught anything about what happens when we die. And he was at a loss. He was at a loss.
Yeah, so one of the things that I believe is that the dying process happens elementally.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a companion, I have a woman in my life that is 93, and I'm a companion to her, and
Mm-hmm.
we are talking about this elemental dissolution, which starts with the earth element, the densest element, goes
Ah.
into the water and then the fire and then the air, and then we become one with the space and the ether.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that just even contemplating something like that, the dissolution of the body elementally and our being, I should say more our being,
Okay.
that can be helpful. And then after, after death, as we both, you're probably aware of, the Tibetans have developed quite a elaborate understanding of the different realms, the Bardo
Mm-hmm.
realms, for people that are interested to explore that. But even having something simple, some simple belief. It doesn't even, of course, death is the great mystery. None
Right.
of us know, and no spiritual teacher has ever said this is what happens.
Right. This is how it is because nobody can tell us that.
Yes, and I think on that note, one of the things I've been considering lately is that there's like a wildness to that. And just like we need the wildness of nature and wild animals, it just opens us. And we get to see ultimately we have no control. And there's a freedom in that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's where the bliss and joy come from,
Okay.
because we get to relax into that. Oh, I really have no control, and I can resist that knowing, or
Mm-hmm.
I can relax into it.
Yeah, that not having to know something was early on one of the points of a biggest relief to me. I'm like, oh, good. This is a realm where I don't have to know everything. I guess especially having worked in the corporate world where you're expected to have answers all the time, and so it was so nice to just be like, I cannot know. It's
Is
okay. It's okay to not know something. It's lovely. I still love it. You
yeah,
know, this takes courage though, right? Is it fair to say this takes courage?
absolutely.
So
Uh,
how do you help people find the courage? Because, the people who are coming to you, they're working with you. I think they're coming with some willingness, but there might be something you do ahead of time to help them find the courage.
Well, I'm doing this right here and right now with
True,
you.
right? We're having the discussion and
And
people are
I do love talking about the topic. I truly do.
hmm
And even though it does take courage, it takes, it's just that first step to be willing to show up with our fear, with our unknowing, with our anxiety. Like this last retreat that I did, there was a woman, PhD scientist.
hmm
She was very, very inner left brain, which we're all conditioned to be, very intelligent, very sensitive. And she came in just kind of like a ball of
Aw,
fear and terror. And and you know, she, out of anyone in the group, I believe, had the greatest breakthrough.
okay.
At the end of class, I think it was the last day, I invite everybody to just write a little poem, and it pours out. But
Okay.
this particular woman, the poetry that poured out of her and the joy. So it's almost like that polarity, right? If
hmm
you're willing to show up with however much fear or resistance or denial, that the potential for joy and bliss and ecstasy is also as great. And I know that personally
hmm
from, my own experience.
Now I'm picturing, as you're describing her, I'm picturing almost like a flower unfurling or somebody coming in like in the fetal position and then just like releasing. Now she had so much, fear and trepidation when she came to you. Do you know what got her to come to you?
She realized how much fear she had on
Okay.
the topic.
hmm
And, again, on this recent retreat, I had two people cancel the day of. So they had registered, paid everything, but the day of, instead of taking that step with their fear, they said no.
Okay. Okay. I get that. They probably were up all night and, I guess it wasn't their time, but then it made space for someone else whose time it was. And so, there's somebody who used to say to me, the right people show up. And,
Yes.
so
Oh, yeah. I mean,
yeah.
it's a self-seeing. And I think, one of the things I've thought about in my own experience, I think because of my early childhood conditioning and that I didn't have a lot of support or just there wasn't a whole lot of attachment that I had. I kind of
Mhm.
came in knowing I was totally on my own. I had a mentally ill mother and no father. And
Mhm.
um, and so I think that because of that, I have had through my life a lot more willingness to explore these deeper questions, where I think sometimes people that have a lot, that it feels like they have a lot to lose, that
Uh-huh.
attachment and fear can be even greater.
Whereas because of the challenges of your childhood, you were pushed toward the deeper questions like why is it like this? Why is this happening?
Yes.
Right.
That was also what even, I mean, my mother was pretty suicidal her whole life.
Mm-hmm.
My brother um, committed suicide.
Mm.
And so death, and not the sacredness of death, was always in kind of the air. And I had my own relationship with, well, that's always an option.
Yeah.
But I think in my case, I was also gifted with this clarity, relationship to yoga, relationship to spiritual understanding, that I kind of knew even as a child that that was not going to be the end of story.
Okay. And because you have these gifts, I think that you probably have some really good ideas about, how we can best support ourselves when we deal with the loss of a loved one.
Yes, yes. I think, one of the things that I think is simple but very powerful is to remind ourselves that we grieve because we love. And just knowing that we have a choice. Do we focus on the grief and the sadness and the loss, or do we focus on the depth of love and the connection we feel to that person, whether they're in their body or not?
Hmm.
So, yeah, I mean, grief is a whole other realm and it comes in waves. I know that personally from my brother's death.
Hmm.
Um, and I think there's a lot of support out there for working with grief. But there is not for exploring death. There's a whole movement with death doulas, and
Hmm.
one of my closest friends through the years wrote a beautiful poem that I put in my book. About death, and she created a whole school around training people to help others consciously die. So that's something else that's become
Hmm.
more popular. But to really hold death like the Native Americans have, through this practice of today is a good day to die. And
Yeah.
just asking ourselves, is it? And sometimes I have felt, yes, I feel fulfilled.
Hmm.
But most times it's like, no, I am not ready to go. And so that in itself can be a simple practice that people might be able to leave this conversation with, just asking themselves, is today a good day to die? And if not, why?
Right. What do I need to do to make it true that it's a good day to die?
Or what feels undone?
Right.
Yeah.
Undone. What is left? What is...
Yeah. And the times when I have felt like I could answer that question,
Hmm.
it's either when I have been deeply connected to a group of people, either with partner yoga or the exploring death retreats, or times that I've felt so profoundly connected to nature.
Hmm.
And those are times when I'm just full. And yeah, I can answer yes to that question.
Oh, that's great. And this has been a really nice, full discussion, and I'm appreciative, and I know everyone else will be too. And as we begin to end our discussion, I just want to see, is there anything you would like to add, anything you'd like to say, or, something I didn't ask that you wished I had? This would be a great time to get that in there.
Thank you, Margaret. I thought looking through some notes from my last retreat, um, I said, at one point I'll ask people um, to write a poem, which often that can be kind of a big ask for a lot of people.
Hmm.
So I'll offer the suggestion of writing with their non-dominant hand, which I've had fun with over the years. And I'll read the poem that came through me on the last retreat. It's very brief.
That sounds perfect.
Die to what you are not. Rejoice in being what you are. Love is everlasting, the fountain of flow from within.
Oh, that is perfect. What a lovely cap to everything we've discussed. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. I love the topic, and it inspires me. And thank you for all the work that you do on bringing this topic forward.
Well, it's joyful because I get to speak with people like you.
You've been listening to the Death Dhamma Podcast with your host, Margaret Meloni. Thank you so much for being here. Come find me on margaretmeloni.com, margaretmeloni.com. And until we meet again, may you be well, may you be happy, may you be at ease, and may you be free from suffering. Bye for now.